Now, one thing we've been dealing with a lot in the black community lately, which is unheard of most of the time because people keep their finger over the mouth about it, is pedophilia and pederasty.
Right, absolutely.
And what that does to the youth of today.
Right.
In the past, as we talked today about the crack epidemic and the crack baby, and then them having children and how this.
Absolutely.
Talk to us about some of that stuff.
I am amazed, brother. I'm amazed that you bring that up. That is one of the most crucial issues that we are not paying attention to, not addressing, dodging, and we just have a crazy legacy coming out of that. We forget how far back this all goes. You're talking about hundreds of years. You're talking about intergenerational transfer of trauma. Like people were raped 300 years ago, and the effects of the raping is still coming out through their family patterns. And that's what I meant by that multidimensional self. One of the dimensions of the self is the inherited aspects of psychology, not just physiology. Yeah, you get certain body parts that come too with it, but it's more than just physical. DNA is not physical. When we talk about DNA, we're talking about the physical representation of something, but what's going through that DNA is not physical, that's spiritual. That's energy. That's energy in a pattern, so it's not just energy. It's energy that is in a certain pattern. And those patterns will evolve under duress, under trauma.
As our elders would say, depending on how you are, that he's like so-and-so, or he comes in the spirit of so-and-so.
Yeah, right.
Because these things are in his DNA or her DNA.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
He fads just like so-and-so, or he's this and that.
Yeah, so you have if you can imagine, I'm going to put it this way, and this is the way I describe it, and this is the way I think about it. So when you go back to the issue of pedophilia, the first question that should come up is, what makes a person do that? What actually is the spirit of that, on that note? Which I'm going to suggest to you is a vampire spirit. That person is feeding off of the energy of that young person. That energy is a vital energy. Sexuality is the vital energy of life that creates life. So that's a superpower. And I said, definition that people are powers with an S, right? So that power is activated through that engagement, and it's activated in a way that that child is in no way able to manage at all. So now it's been kicked in a certain way. So it's like the movies. I mean, when a vampire bites you, then you become a vampire. And so one of the things as a psychologist talking to people who have been abused, one of the interesting things that you see so everybody doesn't act on their experience of it, right? So, but amazingly, you'd be surprised the number of people who have been abused as children sexually, who then are tormented in their minds that they are going to become abusers, even though in their heart they have no intention of doing anything like that. But it's on their mind. They're constantly, so they be walking around. You look, again, on the outside, you can't tell them. They look like normal people. They're trying to get by the best they can. Internally, they can't sleep at night because they're thinking, what if I become one of those people? You see? On their mind. It's on their mind, you see? So we have, failed to acknowledge that a lot of this came out of the church. The big deal with Pope, the new Pope, how we got the new Pope, because the old Pope was under pressure because there was so much of that going on in the Catholic Church, and nobody could deal with it. The Catholic Church couldn't deal with it. The Pope couldn't deal with it. The bishops couldn't deal with it. A lot of them were part of it, right? And so we are so far locked into all of this matrix of lies, so far in it, that we can't even break and say, how do you explain that the Catholic priest is the rapist? How do you explain that? This person supposedly is like all in touch with God and very religious and, you know, pure. He's the actual devil. Okay, now, it'd be one thing if we were talking about one. But we're not talking about one. We're talking about hordes of priests that abuse children. How do you explain that? What is the cause of that? We haven't stopped and really faced ourselves and say, we got a problem that we need to look at. See? So you see, like in my type of work, it comes up all the time, because that's like one of the main questions I ask people. You know, I go through my list, you know, have you ever had hallucinations? You ever saw something that wasn't happening or heard voices? I go through all that. You ever been molested? You know, it's just a basic question. You know, numbers are skyrocketing. They're skyrocketing.
Okay, so now let me ask you, because I don't know how much you get around and hear stuff on the internet, but there's been a situation in the African American community caused by same Catholic-like situation with Africa Bambaataa, Zulu Nation, Planet Rock, hip hop. They said this man was a pederast and he was tormenting young men throughout the Bronx River projects for 46 years or so. Mm-hmm. And now it's been coming out in the community. That's why we've been talking about it more over the internet and different things and stuff. Tell us how you would see this dealing with the spirit and the minds and the hearts of the people of the community. With something like this happening, coming out, how do we as a people deal with this in our community now? Similar to, as you say, the Pope and the priests.
Yeah, well, again, we have been naive and in denial about the actual effects of the slavery period. We're just in denial. We are in denial about the fact that the way that we see the world is really through a pair of eyes of a liar that have been given to us to see the world, so that we don't see what actually has happened and therefore is happening. That's the first point. That every time we want to ask a question about our behavior, we fail to put it into context, except the context has been handed to us by the slave master. Right? And that's why I said we won't even ask the question, well, what is the relationship between being religious and being a pedophile? Because there's a relationship. And what is the relationship between being a Christian religion and being a pedophile? That's too scary for a lot of people. What does that mean, you see? So I don't know all the details about Africa Bambaataa. I heard some rumblings about that. But I certainly know from my work many people who have been in that situation. I've had people talk to me about how they molested children. And when they talk about it, they're tormented by it. But they also talk about the fact that they can't control themselves. And I'm saying, understanding a human being and how power works through a human being, I understand how that works. And it's very much like, if I put it on a physical level and say, so-and-so had sex with so-and-so, it doesn't matter what age they are right now, say, okay, and they had syphilis, and then next thing I know, the person they had sex with also has syphilis. And then the next thing I know, whoever they had sex with has syphilis.
imprinting process.
You follow that part?
Imprinting.
Now, just because we can identify an organism, oh, it's a spirochete, they call it, right? That is transferred from person to person to person to person. That originally came from a llama. It really wasn't a human condition. See, that's the part we forget. That syphilis wasn't something that humans had. Europeans introduced syphilis to the world when they had sex with animals in South America. Prior to that, there was no syphilis among humans. See? So something happened when that organism was transferred from the original host to a human host. Now it's passed on down. I'm saying the same thing is happening here. It's like science fiction. It's just hard for us to grab it. That something non-human has happened. A non-human process has now become transferred into the humans, and the humans are acting it out. And it is a vampire. So pedophilia is actually, at a spiritual level, it is actually a STD. It's a spiritual STD. So, African Bambaataa, I would say, I bet you if you go into his history, you're going to find out what he was doing was something that was done to him. If he was doing that, I can't say I wasn't there. But if he was doing it like that, if there's a long pattern, for example, say, well, it wasn't just a person, it's several people, again, that's what you see. You see these patterns, right? Showing that this is compulsive. It's not thought out. It's not something that, okay, I'm going to go and do this. It's something they can't stop from doing it, right? Him and whoever. When I first came to grad school here, I had a case of a young boy, an African-American male, about 10 years old, that had been molested by his Boy Scout person, his troop leader. And it's weird because the way I found out, he had drawn a picture, because you know we use pictures a lot to help. So I saw the picture. About 2 weeks later, I get another boy, same age, African-American male, same clinic, and I'm talking to him, and he's having problems, and I happen to draw a picture, and damn if he doesn't draw the same picture. And I thought, well, that's curious. I didn't even believe in this drawing stuff back then. I was just this grad student, you know. And I said, this kid drew something just like that other kid I had a couple weeks ago. Brought it to my advisor. The advisor says, I think they live in the same community. Turned out that they did. Turned out they both were in the Boy Scouts. Turned out they both had been molested by the Boy Scout leader. Turned out the Boy Scout leader had molested about 50 other boys. You see, this is a compulsive behavior. It's not something we can understand in a moral sense, like we try to understand this morality. This has nothing to do with that. This is energetic. This is not thought process like we think psychological. Thought is just one aspect of human power. This is not at the thought level. This is actually at the sexual level. This is like an STD of energy. That's what it is. And the point is, are we going to face it? Or are we going to try to act and pretend like it's not as bad as it is? No, it is as bad as it is. And out of that came the confusion over sexuality. This is where you get these people who are not sure what sex they belong to, and they're trying to figure it out. This is where it's all coming from. And that's not the popular answer, I know. I know that. But this is where it's coming from.
Okay.
If you had a person and they said, I feel like I'm a cow. Nobody's going to go out and try to promote that they should be allowed to live as a cow. They're going to be like, but you're not a cow. Cut it out, you know. If you're born a male and then but you're confused and I think, but I feel like a female. Well, those are feelings, but that doesn't make you a female. So the answer to that, oh well, just do a sex change or whatever, you could do that, but that's all denial. We're just in denial when we deal with stuff like this. We don't understand what sex is. First of all, what is sexual? We don't understand what that is. Hetero, whatever. We don't even understand what it is. Gender, we don't know what gender is. Our people understood this. We had whole mythologies to explain what gender is, what sex is. We're totally out of touch with that as a people, I'm saying. So that's why when you go to, like now, many places around the world, certain corners of the world, there's like very low tolerance for that kind of ambiguity. And you know, and everybody wants to look at those people and say, well, they're stuck in the past, or you know, they're being anti-whatever, you know, homophobic, which is a term that somebody made up that really it doesn't really have any real meaning other than the political use that it's used. No, those people have a cultural anchoring that tells them what gender is, and the fact that you cannot get rid of gender. You don't get to vote on gender. Gender is nature. Gender is the fact that the universe operates off of principles plus and minus, up and down, yes and no, male and female, positive and negative. That's what gender is. You can't get rid of it. You can change and try to do all kinds of stuff you want to do. You can't get rid of this invisible principle, though. See, but we're far from that. We don't have our definitions anymore. See, so how can we deal with African Bambaataa in this madness when we don't even know what sanity is anymore? We think sanity is something you can vote on. That's one of the things I learned from studying African culture. You don't get to vote on reality. It's about understanding and not voting on it. What is it?
Tapping into it and using it.
Tapping into it and using it, being aligned with it versus against it. Right.
Alright, so I would like to ask, like, sum it up and everything, but before summing it up, do you consider Islam, Christianity, and things of this nature, as a Dr. Bean once was saying, out of African spirituality system that's been tainted and corrupted?
Right. So, let me say that many people are very preoccupied with searching for a belief system. Something that they can accept as probably true and something to believe in. That in and of itself is false. So when you look in the tradition of life on this planet, people did not have a belief system searching for something to believe in. They simply observed reality and then they codified it in these stories, these mythologies, which is about physics. So what emerges over time are political structures that have some of that information in it, but then it's tainted, yes, it's altered for political reasons. So I'm not really a person that's too fond of religion. I study all the religions, and the foundation of all of them makes sense to me, but I also understand that much of the truth, you know, we talk about esoteric versus exoteric traditions, where people think that the things that they're taught is what the religion is about, when in fact it's about a mystery of information that's underneath what's being taught, see? So if you don't get that, then you're going to miss the point. And so the way that it's taught, it's often taught by people who don't get it. So it's not taught that way. So something as simple as, you know, it doesn't matter where we could go, and I did, you know, find the history and the origin of all these different things, you know. So, but like at one point, as a young man, I started reading the Bible. You know, I grew up in a Judeo-Christian tradition, and I started reading the Bible just to understand it. And I was amazed at how a lot of it wasn't what I'd been taught in church. You know? And something as simple as the book of Genesis, which is the very beginning of it, by the time you get to chapter 6, Genesis 1 through 6, there's a whole lot of stuff that explained about this planet in those chapters, and yet none of that really was taught in the church. And when it says in there, and people know that it says this and still don't see it, and it says, that the Lord God had told Eve and Adam not to partake of this particular tree. And the snake came and broke it off for her and told her, he's lying. He's tricking you. Because if you partake of this tree of knowledge, it tells you right, this tree of knowledge. If you take this knowledge, then you will become as God to know good and evil. Well, what is the deal there? The deal there is that there's something there that is awakening this human being. And once a human being is awakened, then there's a revelation. And the revelation was that the God, Lord God, that had been ruling over Adam and Eve was actually an evil God. That was the whole point. If they didn't have the knowledge of good and evil, then they could never distinguish what's evil and what's not. And so they didn't know that the God that was ruling over them was actually the evil God. Hello. Now I went back and said, where did this story come from? Go back to the Ethiopian Coptic text before the Romans got a hold to it, and before the church fathers changed it and all that. In that book called Adam and Eve. And in that book, it's just straight up raw, welcome to hell. Now I found out why hello came from. Like this place. Right? So that we're trying to get out of here. We're supposed to get out of here. We're not supposed to be comfortable here. We're supposed to be growing ourselves up as gods to get out of here. And that is what the teaching is. That's not what they teach in church. I don't care which tradition. So, yeah, he's right. Dr. Ben, of course, he's right. Dr. Ben being way back, being a person that looked into the origins of all these things. And that's the only way to get there. That's why I had the bookstore. If you know origins, then you can see the tricks. You can see what happened. So I go back to origins, go back to language. Why do we say what we say? What does it mean? If it's in Latin, why did the Roman Catholic Church use Latin as its language when it wasn't the language of the people? The people, they were Italians or Romans. They had a language and it wasn't Latin. So why did the church fathers use Latin? And why didn't they only speak it in the church? So there's a reason. It didn't just happen. There's a reason, right? So until we learn these origins, then we're stuck with trying to believe in something. I tell everybody all the time, I mean, you come up in the morning and get up and you go out into the sun and you feel the rays of the sun and how it feels. You look around and you see all everything in nature is oriented towards the sun and bowing to the sun. You know? You don't have to believe that. It's not about belief. You have an experience. Is sunlight traveling through space, and is it taking 8 minutes to get from the sun to the earth? Is that true? Is it really 80,000 miles away? And so these are all things that we
just the earth around the flat.
You know, we take these things and we don't actually stop and say, well, let me investigate this. Is a star, you know, a star is 150,000 light years away. Really? Is that true? Well, I'm over here in my neuropsych class, and they're talking about how the eyes work and how light has to pass through that little circle, the pupil, and stimulate, interact with nerves, and then send a signal to your brain that there's something out there. So if I'm looking at a star, and I see the star, and my brain is telling me there's a star, then the star is not far away at all. The star is in my fucking eyeball. Because it's got to be in there to talk to my brain, to let my brain know that I exist. You see what I'm saying? And now we're into the problem of time and space, right? Like, is it really time at all? Or is this space at all? Or is it just that we just accept this stuff and just go on? And even though we go right on Sunday, and even though our ancestors told us there's no time or space, there's only the infinite now. That's it. We go and read that and leave there and still believe it's nonsense. Then that teaches us to have the concept of the limited self. And that now we're separate from the God. We can read about the God in a religion rather than imbued by the God, to become the God, even though the religion tells you that's the thing. That's where we're supposed to be headed. And they ask And they asked the master, when the master asked the people that were stoning him, why do you stone me? Because of these great works that I do. And they said, no, not because of the great works that you do, but that you, a man, claim to be God. And the master said, but I told you it's written in your law that ye are gods. Are you getting mad at me now when I tell you ye are God? I say we are God. We are it. We just have a very limited view of our own reality because somebody else redefined it for us.
Yep, I am that I am.
I am that I am. Yes. To embrace that, I am that I am, is to leave slavery. Once I know that I am, then nobody can hold me back.
I'm not that. No, I'm not that.
I am whatever I choose to become. I am the power behind it. I am the process that causes it. I am the substance of the expression that presents itself as it. I cannot be separated from that. As soon as we know that and we live that, nobody can hold us in slavery. Those that captured us know this. That's why they have to teach us something else. The Matrix.
All right, well, I appreciate the convo.
Yes, sir. Hopefully that's something you can use.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, bro. Good to see you.
The kids.